everybody, and welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm your host today, Nick Palavita, and we will be discussing a very important topic that's going on right now in the United States, which is about 10,000 migrants a day coming into the United States. A lot of them, 50%, are from the country of Venezuela. And with that, we have a whole panel here that we're going to introduce, along with the Honorable David M. Walker, to get their comments. So first of all, I'll go to the panel who showed up, a person who's a member of the Mega Society, which is the society above Mensa, which no one knows about. Also a former writer for Jimmy Kimmel Live, Rick Rosner. Good to have you here. Maybe some smart guy can help us with this migrant problem. We'll love to hear from what you have to say. Then we go up to Canada, and we have the author of the very famous book, Monday Morning Millionaire. He is a dentist by background, but also does the investment show. We'll bring in Milan Asmarek. Milan, welcome to the show. Good to hear what Canada has to say about the immigration problem here, and it may also exist in Canada. Then we'll go to Northern California, and we'll bring in a FIDE master, another author of the very famous book, Chess for Dummies, which I see in the Barnes & Noble bookstore. I see them, but I don't see this guy. Who's a FIDE chess master, Jim Eade from Northern California, has joined us. And also to help out this migration problem, we have another person from Canada who originally lived in Odessa, Ukraine, also a chess expert. We got all these chess experts here. Sasha Starr, who's joined us from Canada. And then the former Comptroller General of the United States of America, the only person from the Washington, D.C. area, representing the Tower of Power. Let's bring in the Honorable David M. Walker. David, you see the panel here. There are not a bunch of dummies here. I got a bunch of smart guys on the panel, but we have a real big problem that we have to deal with today called Venezuela, and of course our policy with Latin America. Right now we're looking at migrants coming into the United States at the rate of 10,000 per day. This is not a small problem. It will grow dramatically. And what we need to know is, what are we going to do? As Mr. Wonderful would say on Shark Tank, okay, 10,000 people are coming in a day. What are you going to do? So David, we'll start with you, former Comptroller General of the United States. Any ideas?
Well, I think several of you could probably beat me in chess, although I do know how to play chess. But in any event, let's start off with the overall topic and then lead into this, and that is fragile states. Used to be called failed states. And every year there's a ranking of countries on whether or not they are deemed to be fragile states by the Fund for Peace. And there's several criteria. The criteria are cohesion within the country, economic, political, social, and certain cross-cutting factors. Interestingly, they're almost all short-term immediate factors, and they don't consider something that we talk about from time to time, which is long-term sustainability, including fiscal sustainability. When you look at the rankings, overall, the 5 worst countries in the world are Somalia, Yemen, South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Syria. Not a real surprise. A lot of countries in Africa are on this list. When you look at the best, Norway's the best, Iceland, Finland, New Zealand, and Switzerland. And we've talked about Switzerland from time to time about how they have their act together from a financial standpoint. If you look at Latin America, you'll find that there's one country that is not deemed to be Latin because it's a French influence, and that's Haiti. Haiti is the worst. It's ranked number 10. And by the way, number 1 is the worst. So if you're number 10, you're in the bottom 10, not really the top 10. And Venezuela is number 29. So of all the countries in traditional Latin America, Venezuela is rated the worst. And in fact, it's rated worse than North Korea, Iran, and several other countries. So that's where we're at. And, obviously they have problems of multiple dimensions. They have problems with regard to their political situation. They have problems with regard to their economic situation. They have problems with regard to the growing gaps between the haves and the have-nots, et cetera. And by the way, let me add, the United States is number 141 out of 179. So we're not exactly a shining star in this regard. And let me just now transition quickly. We got two issues going on at the border, the southern border. Number one, the border is not secure. And anybody who tells you that the border is secure is either ignorant, a liar, or both. Just today, 10 minutes before I came on this show, they said we hit a record of daily crossings within the last 24 hours. And that's just the people that we know about, not the people that are the so-called getaways. In addition, Venezuela, you're correct, at the present point in time is number one with regard to people coming here. And that's likely to continue to be the case because the president just basically provided people from Venezuela with special relief to be able to say that they can get expedited consideration for work permits here. We got two issues we have to deal with. One issue is border security. You've got to secure the border, and the responsibility for that is primarily the President of the United States. The President has failed to do what needs to be done to secure the border. He's asking for more money, but he's asking for more money to process people quicker and send them throughout the United States, not to secure the border. That is the responsibility of the executive branch, and the president is the head of the executive branch. You got a second problem, and I'll tee it up, and then let's get into discussion about it because I don't want to dominate this. The second issue, what are we going to do about our immigration laws? They are very outdated. They do not represent current economic, demographic, workforce, and other conditions that we have today. They sorely need to be updated, and that's going to take bipartisan support. But in many regards, people don't want to get onto that until you secure the border. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I think the bottom line is we need to do both. Securing the border is the president's responsibility. Immigration reform is a combination of the Congress and the president. They both have to come together to get it done. And they have to do something that they normally don't like to do. And it's not a bad word, although sometimes think it's a bad word. It's called compromise.
So if you watch the news channels, they often say at the last time we had immigration reform was under Reagan, almost 40 years ago.
It's also the last time we had Social Security reform.
And, each party has their issues that they, I'm a liberal. So like I get annoyed with the Republicans who won't vote to compromise because they love having immigration to yell about. But really it's both sides not being able to, being gridlocked.
Well, Mark, Jim.
Yeah, I agree with the emphasis on compromise. And the thing is Reagan would have a beer with Tip O'Neill, and so you worked across the aisle. And when Newt Gingrich took out his contract on America, that just meant there was no more compromise, no more working across the aisle. And that's what we've seen. And we've seen paralysis in the government. One issue I would take with the setup, Dave, you did a great job, I thought. But the president's job, is to secure the border. But what he wants the money for is to process immigrants because we're a country that gives amnesty. We have a Statue of Liberty. It was given to us for a reason. And so what we want to do is to know who's trying to get across the border for nefarious purposes, who's trying to get the border to seek amnesty. Right now, we have a zero way of determining that. We just send them into incarceration, essentially. And so what we want to do is have judges available to process them to determine who deserves amnesty, who we would welcome into the country, who would become, we hope, productive, tax-paying citizens of the United States. And many, many of them have. And those who are coming in for nefarious purposes, we would send them back. That's the purpose of processing, rather than just, putting barbed wire in the rivers.
Jim, let me. I think you meant to use the term asylum rather than amnesty, because asylum is what people seek when they come here.
Yes, thank you.
an overwhelming majority that are coming here are not eligible for asylum. Asylum has to do with political persecution primarily. All right.
Well,
I'm
I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's not my point.
What the law says, okay? And a vast majority of people are coming here for a number of reasons. Economic opportunity, lack of security, if you will, in their country, if you will, which I feel for that. But we also have to keep in mind that we have legal and illegal immigration, and we got a lot of people that are trying to come into this country through the legal process, and they are actually now being discriminated against. Okay, so yes, we need comprehensive reform, and we can get into that. But a vast majority, there's a difference between legal and illegal immigration, and a vast majority that are coming into the country across the southern border right now are illegal, and we don't put them in jail. We release them and in many cases, they have court dates that are 5, 6, 7 years away. And do you really think they're going to show up?
No, we incarcerate a great deal of them. And also what we talk about is in World War II, did we turn away Jews or did we allow them in? They were being prosecuted where they lived. They were going to face death where they lived. So this is not amnesty. This is, or asylum. This is like saving people's lives. And this is what this country is about. We take your poor, your tired, your huddled masses. And so this is something that we have to live up to. And it's a thorny problem. I understand. But, we have to be able to process those who deserve to be helped and those who deserve to be turned away.
But we then have to decide what's the basis for that. We have, okay? And the other thing is you got to keep in mind, Jim, when the United States was formed, people weren't coming to the United States.
I agree with you.
From Latin America. Okay. In fact, Mexico was stronger than the United States at the time. People that were coming here were coming over an ocean. So they were risking their lives to get here. We had a big moat. All right.
They are now too.
Yeah, but they're not coming over the water.
No, but they're coming through jungles.
No, I know they are. Yeah.
I just wanted to tack in to chime in and agree with what Jim is talking about. One of the biggest problems is that processing. Fareed Zakaria actually did a really good piece on Sunday about the immigration system and how a lot of the people that are in the line, we keep saying that these individuals are being discriminated against. No, the line isn't moving. The people are not being processed. So it's the same thing if you go to Walmart and there's only one line open, you're going to get frustrated and try your best to go elsewhere. You're going to drop your food and do whatever you want to because you're not going to pay for that. So if we do not have processing, we can't do anything else. So regardless of figuring out if they're okay for asylum, seeking asylum, we can't even get to there because we're not processing people. We're not putting up the judges or setting up the systems for people to come through. So we can complain about, well, these people aren't these, we need to set up a blanket. But until we process these people, we don't know what we're doing. We're just we're doing the opposite in reverse. Instead of declaring amnesty for everybody and equality, we're going to let everybody in. We're doing it in reverse, saying, oh yeah, everybody's bad. So we're not going to process you regardless. We're going to keep it waiting line, but the line's not moving.
I think that it's a little bit different than that too, as well. And I agree. I think the lines get frustrating. Why don't we just build villages along the border and let people start living there and slowly let them cross over, or just build another country on the border? Because, they're going to come over. They're going to continue coming over. But the biggest problem that we do have right now, or at least one I think is big, and David kind of hit the nail on the head, is the illegal criminal ones like MS-13, which have been coming over and have organized since I think 1980. It's not a small problem.
It's a very small problem
because they will catch them and release them, and they don't ever come back to court because of our laws and the way our
90% are people escaping to try and find, like the people in line that we're talking about.
Yeah,
those individuals are being hunted as well. So
I
while they're
agree that
waiting in
there
line
are
to be
a lot
processed,
of people.
they're trying to escape. So all these, we keep, the problem we do is we say MS-13 is bad. Everybody coming across is MS-13.
Yeah.
The
No,
majority
I
is
don't.
MS-13. That's
And
not true.
there's no stereotyping there. But what I'm saying is there are a lot of dangerous criminals.
lot.
But they're also, they are not coming across the border. Some of
The
these
percentage
really
is
heinous
low.
ones flew in through our
Just
airport,
take-
and that's where
if
majority
you're
of
gonna
the
talk about
drugs.
percentages, if you're going to talk about percentages, give your source, because that's just not true. Okay.
I'll get you a source right
Give
here.
your source. Give your source. Okay.
But
I don't want to hear
I've-
about percentages. I gave sources for mine, so I want to hear sources. All
So,
right.
and
Because the first
I
one we
believe
don't
that
know how
there.
many gotaways there are.
That's fair
So
enough.
according to the FBI and all the other
Let Kim
all the
finish.
criminal,
Let Kim finish.
I truly believe that a large number do come over for criminal reasons. And again, I want to state very strong right now, it's not just across the borders. They're coming in through our airports. They are smuggling drugs through our airports, and not just on human bodies. They have, made deals with people who just literally turn their heads and let them, move things through on carts and things like that. That we have caught so many, but we still do not incarcerate them or do anything with them because we have this stupid catch and release program that says they have rights. And that's where I think our laws need to change first. Our laws need to change that they don't have rights. If they are over here first illegally, and if they already started a criminal record, then they have no rights. They stay in jail, potentially get shipped back. But the problem is when you ship them back, the crime gets worse, just like domestic violence.
So according to the National Gang Center, the gang member migration, gang activity, gang member migration, 12%. Gang activity, no gang member migration, 6.8%. No gang activity, no gang member migration, 81%.
But that's just
never
what
heard
they
of that
can
group.
count. There's a lot that they don't
So
count.
you asked for the source, and now you're saying,
Well,
well,
that's
that's just what they can
No,
count.
I agree,
That
but
doesn't count getaways.
Now
that's
you're
what
just
I'm
making up
saying.
stuff. Give me, as you said, Dave, give me your source
I'll do
on
it.
the getaway stuff.
Why don't you go to the
Homeland
border?
Security.
Yeah, Homeland Security. That's an authoritative.
There's an interesting
I'll
data.
see if I can get a retired Homeland Security official to come on. He was the
Interesting
director
data that
for
I picked up
several
from CBS
presidents.
News.
But
45% are
One
coming
at a
from
time.
Venezuela. Okay, if 45% are coming from Venezuela, see, I want to go after the problem. All this immigration is symptoms of a problem. 45% are coming from Venezuela. The number one oil reserves in the world is Venezuela.
Right.
So riddle me this, Batman. How can potentially the wealthiest country in the world be so broke that 45% of the migrants are coming from that country?
It's an easy answer for that.
And they're corrupt.
They're corrupt.
Corrupt.
Absolutely.
Incompetent. And they're incompetent.
oil industry is the most corrupt industry in the world.
So they said that
Most.
one of the biggest things that also happened is they put all their eggs in the oil industry basket as well. So once the oil dropped, therefore their economy tanked. And now with the corruption, where does that money go? Up to the top, and then the other individuals. And so these individuals get the people trying to escape this bad area. Yeah. So you got corruption, and you've also got all your eggs in the oil basket.
Well, corruption
But-
at the top, and then people start taking things from other people, and then
Yep.
they want to leave because they're in danger. And this is what has happened in many countries. And I don't know where you got the 45% number, Nick.
I have my source.
CBS.
Yeah.
It's from CBS News.
Okay.
Real trustworthy.
And yeah, well, this is an incredibly difficult thing to actually get accurately. But assume that they've done this correctly, which I don't assume, but we will for the sake of argument. There's a poisoning of the people, and they are escaping for their lives. They're going through jungles that are horrible treks. They're sacrificing their families, everything they knew, everything they know, and they're hoping someone will give them safety. And they're being preyed upon the entire journey. And the journey is dangerous. So it's worse than crossing an ocean, although crossing the oceans, my family did, and it was horrible. Absolutely, but it's no less horrible now. We cannot diminish this. And the majority of people that are coming are escaping for safety, not to commit crimes.
We have our friend from Canada, Dr. Milan.
Yeah. Allow me to make a couple of comments here. First of all, a small aside here. A lawyer friend of mine says he's got 6 dictionaries in his office, and the word compromise is scratched out of all of these. That doesn't apply to what I have to say. Yes, sources are important. When I was 6 years old, my mother taught me always to quote sources. So my source about what I'm about to say here is the Digital Library of Academic Journals. That's as reliable a source as exists. And that source claims that 50% of farm workers in California are illegal. California agriculture is bigger than Canada's agriculture. And 50% of the people working there are illegal. California agriculture could not exist without illegal immigrants. I've said what I had to say. That gives us a different perspective on the issue.
Good point. Well, I think we need to segment it, but let me give you some data from the Department of Homeland Security. Border crossings for known people, where they actually know who they encountered the people. So border encounters are up 5 times from 2000. 5 times. Now, that does not count gotaways, which are over 1 million. We have no idea who those people are. We have no idea where they came from. We have no idea whether they're criminals. We have no idea whether they're part of MS-13 or whatever. I think one of the things we have to understand is we talk about lines. Well, there's 2 lines. There's a line for legals and there's a line for illegals. All right. And yes, we don't have enough judges and all to be able to process that, but you don't treat illegals the same as you treat legals. The other issue that you have is we have to define on what basis we're going to allow people to legally immigrate into this country. If we're going to say it's going to be a basis other than current law is asylum. If you're all right, and there's a process, and most of these people that are coming across do not qualify for asylum under the current definition. Maybe we ought to revise the definition, but under the current definition, they don't. The other thing we have to keep in mind, there's a difference between temporary work permits, which Jim, what you talk about, Milan, what you talk about, we ought to be giving a lot more temporary work permits, absolutely, positively, because in certain areas like agriculture in the summer with cutting grass and lawn care, we need a lot of people. We need a lot of people, and most of those people, quite frankly, tend to go back off season. So we ought to be much, much, much more generous about temporary work permits than we are right now. And the second thing we have to do is we have to decide, well, what's the difference between being able to get into the country legally and being able to stay here for a period of time to work full-time or whatever, full-time, okay, and get a green card versus what's the basis under which you can come here and have a pathway to citizenship. And there clearly ought to be a higher bar for a pathway to citizenship, than just being able to stay here, if you will. Because even one of the reasons, Frank, I'm an independent, okay? I don't like either political party. But one of the reasons that Hispanics are moving more towards Republicans is that they're ticked off that they stood in the real line, did what they had to do, waited, and now you've got these millions of people that are coming across, that are being given preferential treatment, and we haven't even talked about the financial burdens that this is placing, and the security implications that this is placing. Last thing, look, I think we need border security and immigration reform. And I think the immigration reform is a combination of much more generous on temporary work visas, redefine what asylum means, separate the pathway to legal status from the last pathway to citizenship. And one of the reasons that we've been stuck is because, as was mentioned, in the 80s, the last time we did immigration reform, there was supposed to be a trade-off. Reagan said that he would provide amnesty for a group of people in exchange for some of these reforms, including tougher border security. That never happened. That never happened. And so one of the problems is the Republicans, rightly or wrongly, don't want to play because they're afraid that everybody's going to say, well, let's give amnesty to all these people. And there is agreement on giving amnesty to the Dreamers. And I think that makes a whole lot of sense, because if people come across here and they were minors, they didn't. I mean, they're doing what their parents wanted them to do. I mean, they're not, they weren't the ones breaking the law. It was the parents who were breaking the law. So the Dreamers definitely deserve a pathway to citizenship, and probably others too. But I'll leave it at that. Go ahead.
Dave, just a quick question for you. A couple of questions came to my mind as you were talking, and all along those lines. And one of them is there is corporate responsibility as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, because even to what Milan was talking about, there are a number of corporations that are major corporations in the United States that are bending the rules for their own gain, and they are allowing folks to come in from other countries, and there is no consequences for those corporations, whether that's the farm corporations. I think somebody mentioned, it might have been Kim, the planes. I've not heard anybody really trying to regulate what the planes are doing when they're going back and forth. And actually, Mexico just recently did an agreement, and what they were talking about was the rail system. So whether it's the rail system in Mexico or the rail system in the United States, I'm imagining these people are coming across without anybody checking the rail. So it's like almost like the old hobo system and all in that space. So what do we do about the corporate disparity that goes on? Because I think a lot of the migrants are pigeonholed in a very negative standpoint, and we're not looking at the corporate allies that are helping them in that process. And then the second question, and I'd love to hear answers to both of them, is I'm going to use the Caribbean nations as an example. There is a disparity that exists in the way we treat our immigrants. There are two Caribbean nations, Cuba and Haiti, and I can guarantee you that Cubans get in a lot quicker than Haiti, and I think part of that is because of our perception of them as allies and some racial aspects as well. But I'd love to hear your thoughts around that, because both of those, I think, are valid concerns.
Well, first, employers in the United States are not supposed to hire illegals. It's against the law. All right. It's not enforced. And coming back to what Jim said before, if half of the farm workers in California are illegal, they ought to be legal, but they ought to be legal through work permits. I mean, that's ridiculous. Okay. I mean, we ought to take care of it. Secondly, there's a fundamental difference between, arguably, between Cuba and Haiti. I think both, Haiti more of a failed state than Cuba is. Cuba is a failed state, but there's a language difference, all right? And Haiti basically is anarchy, whereas Cuba is communist. And maybe for some reason people feel that, because they're communist, that they ought to get, from a political persecution standpoint, they ought to be a higher priority. We also have historically a lot of Cuban immigrants to the United States, especially in Florida. I used to live in Florida. I used to live in Miami, Coral Gables, and in fact, most of the business leaders and the current mayor of Miami and one of the U.S. senators from Miami are Cuban immigrants. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just telling you what I think's going on.
Yeah, Rick.
No, Jim's had his hand up, and then I'll go after Jim.
Okay.
Thank you, Rick.
Now, you moderate it, Nick. You moderate it.
I'm just finding where Hollywood squares here. Okay.
Yeah.
Jim, you're up.
Okay, thanks. There's a couple of things we haven't mentioned here that are very important, and this isn't a problem just for the United States. This is a global problem. Immigrants are leaving other countries where are failed states, essentially, if we want to use that term, and they're coming into countries that they hope to find some hope. And this is going on in Germany, Sweden, you name the country that's stable. Their borders are being pressed. There's no question about it. The tragedies that are happening in the Mediterranean are just heartbreaking. So this is a problem that is global in nature. But I think the United States could be a leader. And we haven't stepped up to the plate. I think I'm very sympathetic to the arguments that Dave is making. We need to have compromise, and we need to be both humane and honorable in what we agreed to do. And there's another thing that we haven't talked about that is a possibility, is help the Latin American countries. Help them keep people on their borders. You know, we've had an adversarial relationship with Mexico trying to get this kind of cooperation, but why not start with Venezuela and work our way up to Mexico? Help Guatemala, which I know people that have been refugees from Guatemala that are legal here now, and they tell a horrific story. So, you know, and Nigeria, these are Nicaragua, sorry.
Nicaragua, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And so these are the types of things. And yeah, we talk about workers in California as illegals. These are seasonal workers, and even the ones that they come and they do the work that no one else would do and go back. And so why not give them a card or some status? It's absolutely it's not rocket science. This is an easy solution. The last thing I want to say before I yield is that you know, I know a lot of illegals here that have come here from those countries in California. You might not get to see them in Northern Carolina like I do, but man, they help their families back home. They're so grateful to be here.
When the countries south of us function well, or we function badly, immigration goes down. After the crash of 2008, we had a net loss of 1 million undocumented aliens. Everybody went home because the U.S. economy was stinky. So if we can work with South and Central America to help fix their countries, people will stay home. But all you have to do is look at a map to see that even if we do that, we're still screwed because all of Central America is all these skinny little countries that are like 100 miles across. And with climate change, there's going to be huge disruption in these countries that are mostly coastal. Climate change is already screwing up Panama, where they have to divert water to make the locks on the canal even function correctly. So,
Milan.
Yeah, okay. A comment I have to make, a definition of a failed state. A successful state, by definition, is one where only the state can use force to enforce its objectives. By that definition, the United States is a failed state. Think about it.
That's good to have that comment from Canada. Jatovi, you're up.
Well, I was just going to chime in on the one thing that Rick touched on that is going to exacerbate the situation is that climate change. I mean, we can work towards, which one thing we're not working towards is, yes, fixing the symptoms or fixing the actual problem. The immigration is a symptom, and we're not dealing with that. But climate change is going to exacerbate all these symptoms. It's a problem within itself. So more people are going to migrate north just to get out of these problems and get away from, as Rick pointed out, the coastal cities. Also, one of the things that I think could help us, because as we get into a tete-a-tete over, illegals and, they're criminals. And as I pointed out earlier, I mean, most of them aren't criminals. I mean, according to the actual data coming off of the what's this site? The Customs and Border Protection, there were 280 or 2 million, almost 3 million encounters that law enforcement dealt with, and only 564 of those encounters were gang affiliated. So it's really, I think we have to change our mindset in terms of these are illegals or these are bad people. No, they're searching for help. We have to figure out ways to help them. And I think pushing that mantra and changing our mindset that we need to help these people, that could help us in the long run in terms of dealing with our immigration system, because we're not even thinking. I mean, we can argue back and forth over, we don't have the space or we don't have this, but I mean, we got people in line that need to be processed, but we're not focusing on processing them. We got people in line that need help, but we're not thinking about helping them because we're afraid of, there's a gang member, 564 of them. Whoa, there's a boogeyman that could be out there. Okay, yeah, but that's in everything.
From Canada.
Okay, I was listening very carefully to everything what was said so far. Why wouldn't we split this issue of immigration into at least three different categories? One is economic, another one is legal, and the third one is logistical, like processing and so on. Since this is an economic show, I would like to discuss, first of all, of course, economic situation with this immigration. Is economically, forget about the all other issues, is economically immigration in the large numbers is viable economically only for United States, or it is not? This is the main issue, and I would like everybody is answering what they believe it's true. My point of view is tremendously viable for United States to have as many immigrants from all over the world, not only Latin America, because that what creates more jobs, more consumptions, economic activities. These people are very seldom, even like on my experience in Canada, very seldom they're going on welfare or some other government assistance. No, they're working like jobs like cleaning, like just almost any job that Canadians or perhaps Americans won't even consider. They will got their government check and some coupons to get some cheap food or free food or whatever it might be. So the economic aspect of it definitely in my view is to consider not only get these immigrants what they're now waiting, but even increase that number tremendously. Now, how it's been done, for example, in Canada, there are some interesting cases. For example, when there was several years ago, 7 years ago, I believe, it was a huge immigration from Syria, which was a war-torn country. And what Canada developed is a model where they separated Syrians who wanted to come to Canada into several distinct groups. For example, there were very large portion of them were Armenians. They were ethnic Armenians, but who were Syria nationals. So it was very quickly Armenian community, at least here in Ontario, but I think all over Canada, were mobilized, and they provided almost personal care of the Syrian Armenians families moving to Canada. They were housed, they were fed, they started to learn a language. Many of them knew English or so on. And in a few months, all of them had jobs. They integrated into Canadian life, and they didn't need any assistance. And some of them became very successful people in their own rights. So something similar could be considered as well. However, in my opinion, it's economic issue first, and not second.
Yeah, several things. One, Syria is number 5 on the so-called fragile states, used to be called failed states. And that was a specific program that a number of countries participated in numbers that are much, much smaller than we're talking about at our southern border. But I agree, it's a good example to bring up. Secondly, Jatovi, thanks for giving a source. But just keep in mind, your source only deals with encounters. There's over 1 million gotaways. We have no idea who those people are and what they're related. We just don't know. Okay. Thirdly, I think Sasha's right to bring us back to economics. I think you have to look at macro and micro. On a macro, you can look at it and say that the United States has a demographic problem. Not nearly as bad a demographic problem as Russia or Japan or China. Yeah. We don't have a declining population, but the only reason the country is growing is because of immigration.
Yeah.
And the reason being is because our birth rate is not adequate to replace our population. Our birth rate now is about 2 to 1, and because of infant mortality and other mortality, that's not enough to maintain your population. So we're not nearly as bad as other countries, but we got a problem. So we need immigrants, and our country was founded on immigrants. But what we need to have an honest discussion and debate about is what kind of immigrants do we need, and what's the process going to be? For example, to the extent that we're getting immigrants that can help our demographic challenge, that can address some of the needs that we have that Americans aren't willing to fill. One example is what Jim said with regard to agriculture, and then seasonal things, like in the summer with regard to lawn work. That's great. Okay. But on the other hand, we have to also recognize that the world is now in a global economic Olympics. There is a global competition, and that many of our other Western nations have started to change their immigration policy to focus on skills and knowledge.
Mhm.
What type of skills and knowledge do we need in order to be able to grow the economy, in order to be able to not only grow the economy, but provide more opportunity and better standard of living, et cetera. And one of the biggest problems that we have right now from an economic standpoint in the U.S., we've got a very low unemployment rate, but we have a very high labor force. Our labor force participation rate is not as good as it should be. And we have twice as many jobs available than people looking for jobs. And the reason that that's the case is there is a skills gap. There's a gap between the kinds of skills and knowledge that we need in the current economy, which is going to grow, and the kind of skills and knowledge that we have. And to address that, that's a combination of education and immigration policy. I mean, both of those things have to be able to be addressed in order to fill it. And Sasha, thank you for bringing us back to economics.
Off of what
And
Dave said,
agree that it should be an economic situation, but the reason why that there will be a skill gap and there'll be a big decline in medical professional care in the United States is because of the stupid program we have for education, and all of our students that graduate have so much debt they can't afford to work anymore. They can't even afford to live or have a house or have a car. And with the interest rates soaring as high as they are because somebody said we got to get the economy under control, all you're doing is punishing the hardworking laborers. You're not helping them. And you're not helping the graduates who have a huge student debt on their back already. And I know this because I try to work with them as much as I can and help as many as I can. But we're not going to have enough doctors. We're not going to have enough skilled laborers because we have ran that into the ground. In fact, everywhere I go, I have parents going, don't let your kids go to college.
Yeah.
Don't let them go to college. Don't encourage them to go to college. This is what our country has become. But it's okay for foreign students to come over here and get a free education, and then they're affordable to hire. And that's what pushes us out of a job here in our country, where I paid taxes for my child and my family, and then you made it impossible for my children to even get a job after they got a college education. And that's the problem with that. But as far as immigration goes, we just need to maybe tighten up on the border a little bit. We do need those people because we have a lot of lazy Americans who will not work, and we need to fill some of those jobs. I can't even go to my favorite restaurant on Monday through Wednesday now because they don't have enough employees. So and they close Monday through Wednesday. Eventually, they'll probably shut down completely. And they've been around for 50 years until now. So we have a problem, a huge economical problem.
Yes,
But we've got to fix our core first before we can fix all the others.
technology is part of the problem and part of the solution. And we need an ungridlocked government that could embrace some of the last time we talked about this on one of these shows, I facetiously said we just chip everybody coming over the border. But that would actually help if we knew where everybody who's been let into the country to wait for their hearing is. Now, of course, some bad guys that take, have, like some surgeon pop the chip out, but, but like one reason that we're not reproducing and Japan isn't reproducing at a replacement rate is because technology and entertainment is so interesting now that young people would rather just watch streaming TV than have sex.
Hey, Rick, along those same lines and
I
everything
think we
along
have
those lines.
Toby next, Mark. We have to Toby next.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know about the Logan's Run style or if everybody's deciding to watch porn rather than to touch each other. So I can't. I'll leave that alone and leave that with you, Rick.
Sex
however,
among
one of the biggest
teens and young people is down 25% since the very horny 1970s.
But what's your source, Rick? Never mind. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Your source.
Rick and I are providing the details.
Rick has firsthand knowledge.
No, because I was
handed
not.
too.
I wanted to have sex in the 70s, but nobody wanted to have sex with me. So
I think Milan had a question.
I will say that
Jacoby,
Jim touched on the issue that I think is really a problem when you're talking about education or that higher education, and the complaint, Kim, I think that you had saying, well, these individuals are getting the free institution and we're not doing. I think we're pitting two individuals together rather than trying to create a solution, because we shouldn't be pitted against the immigrants that are, yes, getting that education that you say is free, but also we go to a lot of people go to Germany and get free education over there. Why aren't we fighting for these things?
Not a
Why
lot.
aren't we fighting for these? Yeah, a lot of them do. Why aren't we fighting for these things here? Why aren't we trying to push for these amenities or these things that we're complaining that this individual's getting, but we're not fighting for ourselves?
We do. They don't give it to us.
But that's the problem. We give up and we say, okay, it's capitalism. Okay, it's fine. So let's hate this individual that gets it.
I don't hate them. I'm just saying we need to reform. We need to reform. I don't hate them. We just need to fix us first before we fix other people.
Hold a second. I think Milan had
We're not going to have enough doctors.
And stuff like that could help.
Yeah, I think Milan had a point.
A major indictment against the United States and Canada is the high cost of higher education. The average dental student today graduates with a debt of $300,000. By the way, that's part of the reason why we are not having children, because raising a child from diapers to diplomas costs nearly $500,000. But let's get back to the terrible indictment against Canada and the United States, where the cost of higher education is so high. All the Scandinavian countries educate their people, their students, at the expense of the government. Now, educated people wind up earning more and paying more in income taxes, and it's a great investment for the countries that educate them at the cost of the government. Germany does, all the Scandinavian countries do, the communist country does, Cuba does. Cuba is a poor country. You can get a free education over there. Why are our students paying such a high cost for education?
we have to fix that. At the end of the 50s, we had a national freakout when Russia put a satellite in orbit. And for the next 10, 20 years, we had a huge push for education, especially science education. And we've been reaping the benefits of that for the past 40 years. And we need to have a similar push. And the US has 4% of the world's population. We've benefited from having the best of the remaining 96% of the world coming over here, getting educated, liking the American lifestyle and staying here. And we risk losing that to like when China lets people go over there and live large they've got like 200 cities in China that have populations of 1 million people or more. The other countries become more attractive. Reforming our education is part of retaining our dominance.
Yes,
I agree.
Is it possible that a lot of that stuff is due to our capitalism mantra? Because everything that we're talking about has become for sale. Student loans has become for sale. In medicine has become for sale. So all these things, insurance companies try and make the top dollar. Same thing with these student loan companies and these banks try and come in for the top dollar. That drives education out of the way. Same thing with, with even these private institutions and so on and so forth. When we privatize everything, is that why? I'm not saying that capitalism is such a bad thing. There has to be a balance. What I'm saying is monopoly is a game based on the bastardization of capitalism, the capitalist system. That is the ultimate goal of capitalism in its bare, rare form. If we go on that idea, is that where we're headed? Is that part of our problem? If you think about it.
I think it's more fundamental than that. Okay. First, let's talk about education. K through 12 versus college and university in education. We're not even top 25 in the world in K through 12. And we're losing ground. And COVID made it worse with the way that we dealt with COVID. All right. So that's the first thing. We got to get our K through 12 system. Yes, we have one of the best, post K through 12 education systems in the world. There's no question about it, but it's very, very expensive. So we got to get K through 12 in order, including not just math and reading, but also science, financial literacy, and civic responsibility. Those should be critical, in order to graduate from high school. But in addition to that, we also have to understand that not every kid's made out for college.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, there are a lot of colleges that frankly aren't very good. And there's a lot of degrees that aren't very marketable. And that one of the things that we have to do is we have to learn from others. Like Germany, for example, which was mentioned before. Germany tries to do a much better job than we do on having a macroeconomic plan to match the needs of their economy with the interest and abilities of their population. And they try to identify what's needed in the economy, what kind of skills, abilities, and interest individuals have, and they try to match them. And in many cases, matching them is matching them to a trade, which we have a huge problem right now because, we're not doing enough with regard to the trades. And if you look at the demographics of that population, lots of people disproportionately are going to be retiring from the trades, and we don't have people to replace them with, if you will. And you can make a good living, on the trades. My son-in-law is the chief electrician for the Marine Corps Museum. All right, he makes a good standard living, gets a good pension, if you will. So I think this all comes back to we got to do a better job planning. Last thing, it takes three things for any system to be successful and sustainable: properly designed incentives that encourage people to do the right thing and discourage them from doing the wrong thing. Adequate transparency to provide reasonable assurance they will do the right thing and hopefully won't do the wrong thing. And thirdly, appropriate accountability if they do the wrong thing. K through 12 education, healthcare, immigration, tax policy, we're 0 for 3. That's called a strikeout. You have to deal with the fundamentals. And until you deal with the fundamentals, the system's not going to operate properly.
System's broke.
We're arguing about the wrong stuff with regard to education. We're arguing about, which bathrooms people use. We're arguing about whether the school library should have a comic book with naked people in it. We should be the stuff we've been talking about. Nobody's talking about that. It's all these other garbage, distracting issues.
Right.
Sasha.
I'd like to add something to what just David said, that from Latin American immigration, from people who would enter United States, you will not hear demands of 4 days work week or to raise their salary 5-fold or 6-fold and all other garbage. You will not hear that. That's for sure.
We'll send those people to Canada.
Yeah.
Jacoby had that thought.
The ones that complain, we'll send them further north.
Interestingly enough, talking about Canada, the UAW is trying to reach they're trying to reach one of the deals, and one of the things that they may look at is the deal that Canada struck with the union, and that was dealing with pensions, which the UAW had to give up in 2009. So they're actually looking to Canada to actually bring back pensions. That's one of their big battles. Also, one of the things that I think Rick had talked about, how we're arguing about the wrong things. Well, those wrong things are what the vote is about. Culture wars is where the vote is. That was found out using the Southern strategy that came out of Nixon, and all that was built trying to buy votes, or trying to get people to fear people, hate people, and divide us based off of bringing in votes. That was all based off of racism. However, that's still utilized today in the Southern strategy, arguing about what bathrooms and all this other stuff. We're not focused on what can fix us. We're always focused on what can divide us.
Hey, Rick,
Good one.
Nick, I know we're winding down, but just to end on a light note and everything. By the way, I'm speaking from the barrio. That is the nickname for the apartment complexes that I am in, because they are a large portion of the Hispanic population lives here as well. And I want to say most of our management is Latin American as well. So definitely, even though I usually come in and don't say that, but yes, I'm actually seeing a lot of immigrants, and I don't know their status. I don't know whether they're actually legal or not legal, because I just know that I have to go pay them my rent and make sure that I am keeping up with my rent and all in that space. And I don't ask them whether they are illegal or not, and all along those lines. But it is a large population here in this particular apartment complex that is made up of the Latin population. And my brother actually told me that when I first moved here about 5 years ago. He's like, "You're moving into the barrio." I was like, "I didn't even know that that's where I was moving," and all in that space. But definitely, like I said, I don't sit there and try to figure out whether they're illegal or not illegal. But I was getting ready to ask two quick questions that I know we're ending, so maybe we'll get to them next week. One is, you're talking about jobs that aren't that important. I'm thinking some people would say archaeology isn't that important, but that's actually how we find out a lot about history and all in that space. So maybe that is a job that might be deemed as unimportant, but it might actually have some consequences. And then the elephant in the room that we haven't gotten to is, I wonder how much we would be concerned about the population of immigrants if they were coming from, say, Finland instead of Latin America, because that is something that we have not raised in this conversation. And I would wonder if we'd be having as much of the issues if they were coming from Finland or Russia or some of the other European countries versus coming from Latin America. Just asking the question.
And it's time to wrap. Thank you very much for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you next week on Economics with David Walker.
Great job, David.
Have a good week.
That was a
Great
good
job.
discussion, guys. Everybody, good job.
Bye-bye.